The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to Sporty's webinar on ATP Training Requirements, What You Need to Know. I am pulling double duty tonight. My name is Radtke. I'm serving as both your facilitator and also one of the hosts. Joining me tonight is Mr. Paul Jurgens, who's on with us. Paul, thank you very much for being here.
Glad to be here, Eric.
A little bit more about us in just one moment. First, a few housekeeping items as usual. If this is your first time joining us for a webinar presentation, which is part of a series, an ongoing series for Sporties, we do record all these sessions and we do make them available in our free webinar archive. That's available on the exact same page that you registered for tonight's event. That's sporties.com/webinars. So if you do have to step away or if you miss a few moments, whatever the case may be, do know that you'll be able to come back to that same page early next week, possibly as early tomorrow, and see the entire recording. As I know there's a lot of detailed information we will be sharing with you tonight. Very timely, we think, in terms of the topic, because even though many of the regulations we are going to talk about went into effect more than 2 years ago, for anyone that had written test results that either expired at the end of July or didn't get the written in, you are now subject to some of these changes involving the ATP CTP. So we are going to dive in kind of full force and examine every aspect of the sweeping changes that came about as a result of a kind of a noted accident that Paul will discuss further. We do have the opportunity tonight for you to submit questions, which we will reserve some time at the end of our presentations to get to. You can submit those via the webinar software. So with that, we're going to get going. Again, just a little more about me. My name is Radtke, and I lead the educational team at Sporty's Academy. Love what I do, get to come to work at an airport each and every day. I also serve as the chief instructor at the University of Cincinnati for its dedicated professional pilot training program, and of course also am a pilot and a flight instructor. My able co-host tonight, Mr. Paul Jurgens, who just said hello to us before, serves as vice president on the Sporty's Academy team, overseeing all of our publication areas, and also serves as a chief flight instructor, overseeing our staff of instructors at Sporty's Academy and all of our educational activities, and also serves as an instructor at the University of Cincinnati in aviation. And Paul has a whole host of qualifications pilot related. And let me also, with everyone on, offer my congratulations to Paul, who just completed a balloon certification a couple of nights ago. So making him, I think, the first ever Sporty's team member that can pilot a balloon. So Paul, congrats on that.
Thanks a lot, Eric.
You'll have to, if we at the end, maybe tell us a little bit more. But with that, I'm going to let Paul kick us off tonight, and he's going to give you some background on what brought about some of these ATP changes we're discussing. Paul, the floor is yours.
All right. As many of you may know, back in 2009, we had a monumental accident that occurred with Colgan Air Flight 3407. And this airplane was flying from Newark's Liberty Airport to Buffalo, and they crashed while on final, and they had about 50 fatalities, and it has probably been the most sweeping accident in terms of regulatory change that came after this very unfortunate incident. It has been the impetus for all of the changes to the ATP, and so many other regulatory changes that occurred under Part 121, and as well as record keeping that it was required, and there's just been a lot of changes that have occurred because of that. And could you go ahead and pop the next line there? Yeah. Because of that, what we ended up with was the Airline Safety and Federal Aviation Administration Act 2010. Came into play August 1st, 2010, And it required a lot of new regulations in a large variety of areas, as I had mentioned. So and ATP, the fact that we now need to have an ATP in the right seat of the cockpit on a Part 121 carrier was one of those changes, as well as some of the qualifications to become an ATP were changed, and we'll look at those here this evening. So the FAA, Congress mandated that they had to do something, and what they did, they changed Part 61, they changed Part 121, they changed Part 135, and that final rule came about on July 2013. It was fully implemented as of August 1st, 2014, and as Eric mentioned, the effect of that came to fruition here at the beginning of August here in 2016. And the reason was that what happened prior to August 1st, 2014, you could go take your ATP written without a sign-off, without any type of, obviously you need to be prepared, but you could walk into the testing center and you could take your ATP written, and thousands of pilots did that in June and July of 2014 to miss the new rules that were coming into effect that required the ATP CTP to take the knowledge test. And as everybody knows, writtens are good for about 2 years. Well, they are good for 2 years. They're good for 24 calendar months under the old regulations. And so all those writtens that were taken, knowledge tests that were taken in July of 2014, all expired at the end of July of 2016, which meant anyone who had a multi-engine airplane that could do ATP preparation training and get people ready to take their ATP check ride was extremely busy, including us. We had we went from 2 or 3 ATPs a year to over 30 in 2016 that we had put through our ATP program. So it was a massive increase of ATPs that we saw. And if you really want to see all the details of that regulation, it's there on the site. You can take a look at the government printing office. They have a whole package worth of information with everything that changed with those regulations. Now, our primary focus is going to be what happened with Part 61. A lot of things happened on the Part 121 side, but what we're looking at here is Part 61 and what that means to the flight training environment. I say that, and then first note here is what kind of kicks it all in for us, and that's the change that came under Part 121, and now under Part 121, first officers for domestic flag and supplemental operations, airlines, need to have an ATP, and they also need to have a type rating for the airplane that they're acting as first officer in. Prior to this regulation, somebody with a commercial pilot certificate, 250 hours, ink's still wet on the certificate, they could go apply for the airlines, and some of the regionals were taking people on with those low times. So it was just a sweeping change for the industry in general to have the first officers now being required to have an ATP certificate. Didn't change in terms of the medical certificate. We still needed to have a second class to be a first officer, so that was kind of stayed with what it was under the commercial pilot certificate, but now it's the ATP. So the ATP in the right seat can have the second class medical. The ATP in the left seat has to have a first class medical. Another thing that happened is that as the pilots decide they want to upgrade, or airlines want to upgrade their pilots, then the captains now have to have the full ATP, and we'll talk about the difference between a full ATP and a restricted ATP in a minute. And they need to have at least 1,000 flight hours in air carrier operations. So, it's not like they can hire somebody off the street, you know, with maybe thousands of hours flying a corporate aircraft and put them in the captain's seat of an airliner anymore. Now they have to have that experience under Part 121 in air carrier operations. There's some exceptions under they could gain some experience under Part 135 as a PIC, and I believe it's 91 subpart K they can do as well. But for the most part, they want 121 experience for those captains before they can upgrade to that left seat. With the full ATP certificate, the full ATP certificate still requires 1,500 hours of total time, and it requires the 500 hours across country, 100 hours a night. You know, those things didn't change from the old regulation to the new regulation. What did change with the new regulation was that you now have to have 50 hours in the class of airplane that you're seeking the rating for. Prior to this, somebody could have 1,500 hours in a Cessna 172. They could go take their ATP multi-engine check ride in a Piper Aztec with 4 or 5 hours of prep, being ready to learn about the systems on the Aztec and how to manage that Aztec in instrument approaches and on single engine. And you could have your multi-engine ATP with no problem. Now that's changed. You've got to have the 50 hours of time in a multi-engine airplane before you could get the multi-engine ATP, and if you're looking at a single-engine ATP, you'd have to have 50 hours in a single-engine airplane. So, somebody that's coming over from, say, the helicopter world, where they've got all their time in helicopters, they still have to get at least 50 hours in that category and class of airplane to be able to add that ATP on for them. The other hours, the 75 hours of instrument time and the 250 hours as PIC, that hasn't changed. That's the same regulation that we've always had to have for a full ATP certificate. I'll go ahead and click to the next slide there. Thank you. All right, so we've got a few things that are stipulated in that regulation as well. We've got a maximum of 100 hours of total time may be obtained in a full flight sim or in a flight training device if it was done under an approved program. So just so somebody has a flight training device or full flight sim goes and plays in it, doesn't mean that they can count that time. It has to be under an approved training course under Part 121, Part 135, Part 141, or Part 142. And 121, 135 are, well, 121 is air carrier, 135 is more charter type operations, 141 is certified flight schools, and 142 is the flight training centers that do use the full flight simulators, like the ABX Airlines has a 142 operation, which is Eric will be talking about in a few minutes. If you're a commercial pilot, you can credit some of your second in command time toward that 1,500 total. If the SIC was required. So if you're flying in an operation that requires an SIC, requires a second in command, those hours can be credited at a partial rate toward the 1,500 hours. It just has to be required by the operation. So if you've got a friend with a twin and they let you fly in the right seat, then that doesn't necessarily count. It's not SIC. That's not second in command. It has to be an airplane that requires a second in command or an operation that requires a second in command. If we've got anybody on that has experience as a flight engineer, and some of those hours can count as well, and a reduced amount. As we said, We do require the 50 hours of multi-engine flight time, and Eric is going to tell you a little bit more about that, as well as talking about the ATP CTP requirements.
Yeah, so obviously the multi-engine flight time requirement was a substantial change from the previous regulations. And, there's not much that can be done about it. I mean, and it certainly adds some additional financial burden in terms of being able to acquire those that amount of time. But there's no other credit, given for that type of experience. So, for us up-and-comers in aviation, especially on the civilian training route, we're just going to have to accept the fact that there's going to be some added expense, whether or not you can get that as an MEI doing some training, or whether or not that's something that you're just going to have to come out of pocket and possibly look for some block time. Another substantial regulatory change that came about as a result of these sweeping ATP changes is the requirement that pilots that are going to sit for the written examination for ATP multi-engine complete an Airline Transport Pilot Certified Training Program, or ATP CTP. So notice, please note that requirement is strictly for the ATP multi-engine written exam, because now there does exist two separate written examinations, one for a single engine track, which has no prerequisite requirements, requires no endorsement, but then one on the multi-engine track, which requires as a prereq this ATP CTP. Now, this ATP CTP, if you've not done any research or have not heard much about it, brace yourself. This does add some substantial expense to this entire process. Not only are you looking at the expense of the written exam itself, which is about $160 right now, no matter if you're going CATS or laser grade, but these ATP CTP programs can run anywhere from about $4,600 upwards of $5,000 and even higher with some training institutions. And there's not, as we speak, a lot of options. Now, the good thing, the positive thing for anyone that's on an airline type career track, many of the regional air carriers, because of the kind of state of affairs that the industry is in and the dire need to attract and recruit airline pilots, many of the regional airlines have gone out and they have sought approval and developed their own ATP CTP programs, and they are offering this training as part of your onboarding process. The kind of population out there are those that are kind of left out a bit, are those that are seeking employment in private or business aviation and seeking a multi-engine, or if that's just something you aspire to do, there is going to be that added expense. So we're talking about going from around $160 for an ATP written exam to something north of $4,500, or what it comes down to in actuality. Now, what is ATP CTP? Well, ATP CTP philosophically was designed as an educational offering and program to help bridge the knowledge gap in the experience between commercial pilot and airline transport pilot. There's no doubt that it is very much geared towards large airplane operations. There's an entire advisory circular that was dedicated to it. Learning topics as part of ATP CTP are going to include aerodynamics. It's going to include upset prevention and recovery, meteorology, air carrier operations, turbine engine operations, large aircraft performance, automation, and it's also going to address what I refer to as maybe some aviation soft skills such as leadership, crew resource management, those types of things. The course itself is required at a bare minimum to include 30 hours of ground training. And in addition to that, 10 hours of simulator training. Now, 60% of that simulator training is required to be in a level C or higher. So that essentially means level C or level D. So level D is the highest level of certification for a full motion simulator. So the types of simulators we're talking about complete visuals in the level D, day and night operations, a full-scale, flight deck mock-up. These are devices that are very expensive, very high-tech. These are devices that individuals can get full-blown type ratings in. That's the type of simulator equipment we are talking about here. We're not talking about PC-based or desktop simulators. These are full motion flight simulators. Another stipulation related to the simulator equipment is that it is required to be accomplished in a multi-engine turbine airplane with capable of a takeoff weight of 40,000 pounds or greater. So what that kind of indicates is that for a lot of kind of the business aircraft market, really that eliminates those platforms from the possibility of being used in this case. There's also a variety of stipulations related to the instructional requirements for those that are delivering this training. So the training has to be conducted by individuals that do have some air carrier type operations. And those instructors have to be also type rated in the actual aircraft that they are instructing in as well. So it's not just open for anyone. And you can clearly see why we probably have not seen more ATP CTP programs that have been created and that have been approved out there, because it's quite an undertaking, and it's really left to the large flight training academies that are likely already certified under Part 142, or those that are conducting regular airline type training. But to kind of speak to the positive for a second, part of these requirements and the feedback we are getting from those that are accomplishing the ATP CTP is largely positive, because you are really getting a wealth of experience, number one, from the instructional side, and access to some very sophisticated equipment, and the experience of some of those high altitude operations, navigation, automation related to large aircraft flying that you may not be able to receive in any other type manner. In terms of options or opportunities for ATP CTP training, I will take an opportunity to mention that Sporty's in partnership with ABX Air was one of the very first approved, FAA approved programs. That is a distinction to make, that again, these are certified programs, not just anyone, even if they meet those other requirements, that they have the equipment and even have the instructor experience. That doesn't necessarily mean you can conduct ATP CTP training. It's a formalized course that has to be submitted and has to receive approval by the FAA, and they do publish a list of those providers on the FAA website. In terms of the providers currently that are offering this type of training, it's really a mix of academia and also regional air carriers, ExpressJet, Air Wisconsin, Piedmont Airlines, PSA Airlines, SkyWest, Atlas Air, Delta Airlines, Republic Airlines. Those are the airlines that are providing the training. And also some household names in in flight training in 142 academies, such as Flight Safety International, CAE Simuflight as well. And then from the educational perspective, you have Embry-Riddle that's really leading the charge there with approved programs on both their Daytona Beach campus as well as their Prescott, Arizona campus, which are largely reserved for students at those institutions. So there are not a lot of options, and for those, again, not going the training route, we certainly always appreciate you considering the Sporty's option as well. These programs range in duration. They can be as little as a 5-day program, which is the case of the Sporty's offering. That is the shortest duration program that's currently offered out there. They go all the way up to 8 days in duration. And again, the costs vary tremendously, and some of that depends on the actual platform that individuals would be flying in. But on the lower end, certainly the Sporty's offering at $4,600 comes in kind of at that lowest price point, and again the shortest duration. That's utilizing both the 767 platform as well as the DC-9 platform. You know, there's institutions that are using, you know, platforms up through the 737 and 757 and 767s, some that are focused on the regional jet series, and also some of these programs do include the written examination, and some do not. So do bear in mind, and it's a common question that I get in particular, is will ATP CTP provide any practical preparation for the written examination? And the short answer and the very clear answer is no. Even though ATP CTP is a prerequisite, in your mind you have to completely separate the two. ATP CTP is only a prerequisite. It is in no way, shape, or form any kind of preparation course for the written exam. So at the conclusion of ATP CTP, you will receive a graduation certificate that would need to be presented at an FAA written testing center. But you're certainly going to want to take steps on your own to either participate in some written exam preparation course, or maybe partake in one of the many, you know, online preparation resources, or there's books you can buy to, you know, help prepare for that written exam. But ATP CTP in itself will not do that. Also a change related to knowledge exam results. So many of you, or probably all of us are probably accustomed, and Paul alluded to it earlier, to the traditional 24 calendar months that written exam test results are valid for. Well, post new regulations, August 2014, those written exam results are valid for up to 60 calendar months, as opposed to the 24, of course, that was kind of on the old system right there. It's worth noting, related to expirations, that the graduation certificate that I mentioned before for ATP CTP that has to be presented at the testing center to be allowed to sit for the written exam, that in itself does not expire. So you can consider taking, you can start looking at schedules, the ATP CTP course really any time. But you do still, even though we've extended expirations on the written exam all the way out to 5 years or 60 calendar months, you do have to give some consideration, or should give some consideration to when you wish to take that, to ensure that you will be able to get the practical exam completed. Again, the single engine ATP, completely separate track, does not require the ATP CTP course, but it is a separate and distinct knowledge exam. So for those on that single engine track, you can still go that route and not have the ATP, and those knowledge exam results still remain on the traditional 24 calendar month expiration. Let me touch on another FAQ that comes up quite a bit. Does the possibility exist to earn a single engine ATP and then add or upgrade to a multi-engine ATP in some manner, or somehow bypass or avoid the ATP CTP requirement? The answer is no. That is not a possibility. If you went single engine first, you would still be required to take the ATP CTP course prior to taking the FAA written exam for multi-engine. Shifting gears for just a second, the regulations also introduced a brand new certification, or a brand new variant of a certification, I should say, known as a restricted ATP. What the restricted ATP essentially introduced or validated was that there can be a benefit, and notable benefit, from individuals who have gone through or who have accomplished highly specialized, highly regulated, approved coursework, either in a military training environment, a 4-year aviation degree program that results in a bachelor's degree, or also a 2-year associate degree program at a collegiate aviation institution that's accredited, whose training is all conducted under Part 141. And what Restricted ATP CTP does is allows one who possesses a restricted to still operate in the air carrier environment, because ultimately it is an ATP. It just carries restrictions with it. In other words, you can only operate as a first officer. But the credit that is given varies depending on the type of specialized training that you receive. So as you recall from Paul's discussion, 1,500 hours at face value is what's required for ATP, or an unrestricted ATP. However, if you have that military training background, you may be eligible for restricted ATP and therefore a job in an airline or a Part 121 carrier at 750 hours of total time. Having completed a bachelor's degree program with an aviation major, you could be eligible for restricted ATP as little as 1,000 hours total time. Possessing the associate's degree, that credit is 250 hours, and you could possess the restricted ATP at 1,250 hours. Important distinction. Having gone through a program in and of itself does not necessarily make one eligible for restricted ATP. Similar to creating an ATP CTP program, it does have to go through an FAA application and qualification step. In other words, a specific institution has to complete an application, has to supply evidence that it meets all the requirements and stipulations of the advisory circular that was created. It has to be submitted, and you have to receive an authorization and a letter of authorization in order to offer that credit. And you have to have conducted your training there, at some point after that institution did receive approval. The restricted ATP is available to those that are 21 years old with 1,500 hours. For those that don't possess maybe one of the additional pilot experience requirements that Paul even mentioned earlier. This was specifically created, I believe, with the flight instructor in mind. Because as flight instructors, and Paul and I have worked as flight instructors coming up, it can be difficult, and you can go through long periods of time when you're not building or not accumulating that cross-country time. So there was a carve-out, a stipulation put in, a qualifier put in, that if you've reached 1,500 hours but fall short on the cross-country requirements, but possess at least 200 hours of cross-country, you could also be eligible for restricted ATP. And that R-ATP, of course, is going to allow you to operate as an SIC, a co-pilot only, in an air carrier. Question that comes up, another FAQ I'll hit head on right now. How does one convert, or how does one move from a restricted ATP to an unrestricted ATP? Well, great news. It doesn't involve a check ride. It doesn't cost you any additional money. It does cost you a little time, and it does cost you a little paperwork. One can transition from a restricted ATP to a full unrestricted ATP with paperwork only, requires an additional completion of an 8710, and then evidence, of course, that you have met all of those piloting, all those experience requirements that Paul had mentioned earlier. Now, I'll also mention, at face value, with the new requirement that airline pilots possess an ATP. And of course, then there's this option for restricted ATP that brings down that total time a little bit. Certainly on paper, at face value, it would appear to be a very drastic change for any of you aspiring professional pilots that are listening right now. It sure sounds like a drastic change. Prior to the new regs, I could get an airline job with a commercial pilot certificate, which only requires 250 hours of total flight time, right? Well, no, I think that's wrong. And what I would submit is that these new requirements, while onerous, and it's worth noting just a bit of commentary that both pilots aboard the Colgan accident that Paul led with did possess ATPs. So this particular requirement would have done nothing, in terms of the crew qualifications in that particular accident. But the requirements to become an airline pilot have always been market driven. And historically speaking, if you look back 10, if you look back 20 years, there's always exceptions to the rule. No doubt about it. You may know someone, you could probably point, well, this person got hired with 300 or 400 hours. Well, those are exceptions. But traditionally speaking, an airline job always required 1,000 to 1,500 hours, and likely 50 hours, if not 100 hours. I remember times when it was really 200 hours of multi-engine experience before one could land that airline job. So, this is not in any way really defending or justifying, these new requirements, the new experience requirements, the requirements for ATP, CTP. However, I will just point out that from an experience perspective, I don't believe this to be a dramatic change. Also, back to R-ATP, it is worth noting that to earn the R-ATP, I mentioned how there was no check ride required to convert from R-ATP to a full unrestricted ATP. To get the R-ATP in the first place does require the full traditional check ride like you would expect. So in summarizing everything we've kind of talked about this evening, pilots must hold an airline transport pilot certificate to fly for an airline, no exceptions. You must complete an ATP CTP course prior to taking the knowledge exam for multi-engine ATP, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but if you do not already, as we speak, have an ATP and you haven't yet taken the written exam, you have to go take an ATP CTP course. And I've spoken to a customer already this month that just kind of lost track of when their written exam results expire. So, your written exam results, they expired at the end of July, or if they didn't, and you don't already have that in hand, you're definitely going the ATP CTP route. So that's probably not the greatest news to hear, but again, I'm back to there are options. There are some good training programs out there. We've been getting a lot of great feedback. You do have to possess 50 hours in category and class required. So for you multi-engine ATP seekers out there, it is required that you possess and obtain the 50 hours of multi-engine. And the restricted ATP, of course, a brand new concept, does allow you to reach the essentially airline minimums for certification with fewer hours and at a younger age, down to 21, and those credits, 750 military, 1,000 for completion of a 4-year program, or 750 for a 2-year program. That is approved, and there's also a listing of those various approved programs on the FAA website as well. Now with that, I'm going to offer an opportunity for Paul to jump in if he has any closing comments before we get to questions. Paul?
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to mention too is that ATP CTP graduation certificate, the emphasis has always been that you have to have it to take the knowledge exam, and that's true, but you also have to have that with you when you present those knowledge exam results. You also have to present that to the pilot examiner so that he or she can confirm that you had the ATP CTP as well, and that all gets submitted with your paperwork. When they do that, they include that information about the ATP CTP. So just because you get the knowledge exam done, don't throw away that certificate. You need to keep it until you've got your ATP in hand.
Paul, I'm going to, the several questions that we have coming in, I want to pose the first really two to you, and I'll do it one at a time here.
Sure.
But we have an individual that's kind of asking what our thoughts are or whether we have recommendations, and Paul runs our ATP training programs at Sporty's Academy. Whether we have recommendations for preparing for the actual written exam, like in other words, how has the Has the written exam itself changed dramatically since the new regulations, and where do we go? What resources are available out there to prepare?
Sure. Yeah, there have been some pretty significant changes to the multi-engine ATP written. Prior to the change in the regulation, there were actually two different options for the ATP written. There was a 135 option and a Part 121 option, and depending on which one you chose, you got the same ATP certificate in the end, but the regulations that showed up on your exam, as well as the type of aircraft that was on your exam, would change. Now there's only one path, there's only one multi-engine ATP written to choose from, and there are several options out there for getting ready for that knowledge test. We at Sporty's, we sell the products that ASA produces, some excellent products for test prep. They have books, they have software CDs that you can use to help get you ready for that test. There's a lot of other companies out there that do produce those types of products as well. Gleim, the red books that everybody knows about. I believe that possibly the King schools may have an ATP written prep product, and there's one that we've talked to a lot of people that they say they've been using. It's a company called Shepherd Air. It's purely an online option, and they provide you with written test prep as well. And that's essentially all they do is written test prep from my understanding. So I've heard good things about all the different companies, and so it's really just a personal choice in that matter.
Now, Paul, shifting our gears to really the same question, but it's related to the practical test. So, okay, say we have the written exam out of the way, we've done our ATP CTP. What type of preparation or what can we expect in general to get the actual ATP certificate accomplished?
Sure. As of right now, the practical test for the ATP hasn't changed that much from this implementation of these regulations. I mean, there were some minor updates to the PTS, but not anything significant in terms of what's required on the check ride. With the ATP, you do not have to have any type of recommendation from a flight instructor. So you can essentially, once you feel like you are ready, if you had the airplane available to you, you could go and you could set up a time with an examiner and you could go take that test. Now, most people don't have that multi-engine airplane sitting there that they can just go jump in and go take the test. So they come to somebody like Sporty's Academy, where we've got our Piper Aztec, and we have an ATP preparation course. And essentially what it is just running through the maneuvers in the Aztec, getting to know the systems on the Aztec, and then we arrange for an examiner to come and see you. Our instructor doesn't need to sign off on anything. It's more like a rental checkout than it is a true course, but as part of the rental checkout, you're doing all the maneuvers that you would need to do for the ATP check ride. Another option is that you could do your ATP, after you've got the written test done, you get the job at the airline, you can do it that way through their training program. Or if you decide you want to get a type rating through one of the flight safety or SimuFlight, for a smaller corporate jet, you could get your ATP through a program like that. Now that's going to be a much more sophisticated program than the Aztec checkout, but that's essentially what you need. And the PTS is out there on the FAA's website. It's not terribly complicated there. It's a lot of instrument approaches, and it's being able to deal with the systems and being able to fly the approaches with one engine simulated feather or having an engine failure. You're going to have the emergencies. Your oral for the ATP really should not be that bad. It's about systems on the aircraft, and it's about performance of the aircraft. And then the flight is can you fly instruments at a really close tolerance?
Thanks, Paul. Next question I can jump in on. It's related to ATP CTP. And the question is, again, it's kind of expectation related, how long type of material, that you're going to get, preparation required, and finally a test. So kind of a multi-part question. So, in general, the ATP CTP programs that are out there, so at a bare minimum, they have to contain 30 hours of ground school and they have to contain 10 hours of simulator training. So there's 40 hours right there. So, you're going to be spending nearly a week, and when you factor in some travel potentially to some part of the country to get this done, you're considering a travel day on either side. So, you're looking at a week's time, and I know that's not great news for a lot of people, and that can be a big financial burden to get away from a job and family and other life's commitments. But that is what you're looking at in that respect. Regarding preparation for ATP CTP, there's no real requirement there, and don't expect that you're going to be provided some books or other resources. You're not in any way, shape, or form expected to become an expert on whatever aircraft platform ATP CTP is using. It's meant to be an experience. It's meant to be a positive experience. It's meant to give you the exposure to those items. Topics are going to include, as I mentioned before, aerodynamics, upset prevention, meteorology, high altitude ops, air carrier operations in general, and some of that crew resource management and leadership. And high altitude aerodynamics, of course, in the actual simulator. There is a test associated with there is an assessment piece to the actual ATP CTP course, but that is all material that will be provided to you, that will be taught to you while you're at the exam. So my best advice in preparing for ATP CTP, go in with a positive attitude, go in with an open mind, get ready to see some cool stuff that you've probably not seen before. Get ready to tap into some of that great experience that these instructors are required to possess. They're experts on that airplane. You're going to be operating in a crew environment, so there's just going to be times when you're sitting there in the simulator, either watching your partner do something in the simulator or maybe watching the instructor perform something in the simulator. So again, this is the time to just sit back, relax, and let it soak in. Not something you're going to have to be studying for, or cramming, or taking notes during the course. That's really what you can expect from ATP CTP. Related to one additional question, and this is just a real quick answer, was that transitioning from a restricted to a full ATP, and it's just a reminder, there's no additional tests involved in doing that. That can be your paperwork only, 8710, document that you've reached those minimum experience requirements, and you can get that restriction lifted. We're going to take one more question. Let me throw this one back to Paul. Paul, we have an individual on who's kind of asking our thoughts or ideas, like, for those who are looking to build the time to ATP minimums, what's out there other than flight instructing? I mean, it seems like everyone knows about the flight instructing possibilities. Are there opportunities, overnight check flying? That's kind of become a thing of the past. So are there opportunities that you know of, Paul, or you could suggest there?
Yeah, I mean, what I've seen some of our folks doing is that have been coming to us. They've been coming out of things like some aerial survey. So they're flying straight lines, taking pictures. That type of operation. That's a lot of time building, and a lot of it's cross country time building as well, because they are going. They may start at one base of operation, but they move from base of operation to base of operation with the aircraft. So there is that type of opportunity. That's a lot of VFR flying, so it doesn't help you with the instrument skills that you have to be able to maintain. The other type of some other things that I've seen people doing, quite often the skydiving drop zones are looking for pilots. Again, it's another VFR flying opportunity, but it is a way that you can build a fair amount of time quickly. Again, though, not a lot of cross-country flying. So it's VFR, non-cross country. It's fun flying, but it's challenging flying. It's different flying if you've never done it. But you know, that's some of the things I've seen. The other things out there, you know, are the potential for getting into a 135 type operation. They have lower requirements. There still are some requirements, though, to get some experience there. If you can get into an operation where they're doing, I've had friends flying night IFR, a lot of night IFR cross country, flying package delivery in some older aircraft, but unfortunately, that's some fantastic experience, and those types of pilots can walk into an ATP check ride and not have prepared and ace the thing, because that's all they've been doing. That's all they've been doing is hand flying at instruments at night. Going back a little bit to the earlier question, if you're planning to do that ATP check ride or that final ATP prep there, do yourself a favor, and that one you do need to prepare for. The ATP CTP, you don't need to come with any real preparation, but for that ATP check ride, you want to come instrument proficient. I'm not saying instrument current, I'm saying instrument proficient, that you can fly an airplane to ATP standards when you walk in the door. The prep programs are there to get you checked out in the airplane. They're not how to fly instruments. You need to be proficient when you get there. The other thing that prep program will probably do is send out some information about the aircraft, about the systems, about the performance. Get to know that information before you arrive, and it will go very smooth. It goes, very easy. So those are just a few thoughts on the check ride and some possibilities for building some time. I'm sure there's a lot of other opportunities out there. I know that we've also had some of our pilots come in that off of a Part 135 passenger carry and charter type operations where they were spending a lot of time in the right seat in a two-pilot crew. So that could be a possibility as well. You just got to look for the opportunities, and any place that you can find a chance to be able to log some time. If you've got friends that need safety pilots, those are, you can get out there and assist on that without a flight instructor rating, especially if they're flying under the hood and you're helping out as a safety pilot. So it's a little bit of time anyway. So anything you can do.
Paul, thanks for that. Very complete answer. A lot of good, good point. A lot of good info there. Well, with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to wind things down. Let me mention once again that this recording will get posted. All the information will be available at sportys.com/webinars. We also have some resources and information available at sportys.com/ATP if you're looking for some specifics on ATP CTP, including a very useful frequently asked questions guide. If you certainly are in need of any of the training that we've discussed tonight, be it ATP CTP or even ATP Practical, always certainly appreciate you considering Sporty's. SportysAcademy.com for information on in-airplane practical ATP training, and again, sportys.com/ATP for information on our CTP program. Do visit back to our website, sporties.com/webinars, for a look at all of our upcoming presentations. We would certainly very much enjoy having you on. Appreciate everyone staying with us this evening. For Paul Jurgens, again, I'm Eric Radke, and on behalf of the entire Sporties team, thank you very much, and safe flying to all.